What's up, everybody? We're back at it here with day 9 of Karen Reed's trial, and we have more members of the Albert family taking the stand. We hear a lot of the same stuff with some minor differences, and we'll talk about whether or not those differences are important as we go throughout the video today. We finally get introduced to the dog that we've heard a little bit about throughout this case. And lastly, we have a little mini hearing right in the middle of the day about witness intimidation and removing somebody from the courtroom during certain witness testimony. We can break that down if you guys want to. It's going to be a choose your own adventure today on the show. So hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. Let's jump into it. All right. So Julie Albert, I believe this is Julie Albert. All their names are running together. Mrs. Albert, I might as well just go with Mrs. Albert. That's easier. Is on the stand, and we're going to get into her continued cross-examination. But before we do, I want to know from you all. I have it time-stamped, but I don't know how much you really want to dive into it. But there was a little mini hearing, as I mentioned off the top, about somebody being removed from the courtroom for witness intimidation purposes. There were arguments made. So I'm going to have John throw a poll up right now as I start the video. Do you want me to play that whole hearing? It's about 15 minutes, or just clips of it. I can clip it down to probably 5 or 6 minutes to hit the highlights of the hearing and still explain what went on, but I won't get all the arguments in there. So you guys choose with your votes. Go ahead and vote on that as we start, and I'll take a look at it by the time we get to that hearing. But first, she's back on the stand, and there's a lot of, repetition about these 67 calls. And is that a lot? Is it not a lot? She chose any word she wanted to choose in the English language and chose rarely, or it was unusual for us to talk on the phone. Repeats a lot of stuff about the timing of the calls with Proctor, but does get her to agree that she mentioned his client's arrest the day that it happened, and she could have had other conversations with Proctor's sister about the case, and that she never told Proctor's sister that she was, in fact, a witness in this case. He also gets her to admit, which was a very common theme today, and I think it's the first we've heard it. I could be wrong about that, but it seems like the fact that Colin Albert was over Brian Albert's house, 34 Fairview, that night slipped everyone's minds when they were doing interviews with law enforcement officers, and she confirmed that that's what happened, and she just basically said she was nervous to be interviewed by cops. And she very specifically remembered certain phone calls when the Commonwealth was directing her, and the defense didn't love that. So when they were cross-examining her, they brought that up, and I thought there was a little, cute moment in court where she remembered to bring her readers today, so we didn't have another moment where Yannetti was passing off his glasses to Miss Albert here. But let's take a listen to this exchange.
Correct. Yeah. And then Michael Proctor and the other trooper left, correct?
Correct.
Then at 6:17 p.m. that same night, shortly after you had been interviewed, you called Michael Proctor's personal cell phone number, correct?
I don't remember.
Well, that's an interesting phone call we haven't heard about yet. So after her police interviews, what does she do? She calls her best friend's brother, Michael Proctor, on his personal cell phone. Maybe no big deal if you want to talk about the case and it's a cop and the cop gave you your cell phone number. I've seen that happen before. It's unusual, but it's possible. Doesn't seem like that's what this is. So I don't know. That really made me say, okay, all right.
Let me have a moment.
Okay.
You didn't bring your tutors today. Oh, you did? Good. Okay. May I approach you on?
Yes.
This is the same document. I'm going to hand you one document. There's an orange sticky on it that you can ignore.
Okay.
But right above the orange sticky, there's a date of February 10th. That's what I'm directing your attention to. You could look at those 2 phone calls, ma'am, and look up at me when you're done. If I may approach. Did that refresh your memory about those 2 phone calls on February 10th?
I mean, I just read them, but I don't remember.
Okay. You called Trooper Proctor at 6:17 p.m. And it appears to be a 5-second phone call. Did you see that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Do you recall that Trooper Proctor called you back that same day at 6:21 p.m. and that you spoke for about 4 minutes?
Objection, Your Honor.
Do you deny speaking to Trooper Proctor for 4 minutes when he called you from his personal cell phone on February 10th of 2022 after you had been interviewed that day?
No, I don't deny it, but I don't remember it.
When did you get his personal cell phone number?
5-second call back for a couple minutes. Very interesting. What'd they talk about? She doesn't remember.
Don't remember.
Years ago?
I'm sure, yes.
Because you
So it's also interesting that when some of these answers are given, when did you get his number? She definitely doesn't want to make it sound like she got his number that day to call him, right? Because that looks like even worse potentially. But then to say she's had his number for years just gives more of a long connection with Proctor, right? I don't have all of my friends' sisters' numbers, and my sister's friends definitely don't all have my number. So it's not just like, oh, it's obvious she's best friends with the sister, she has his number. I'm trying to think of which of my sister's friends actually have my number. A couple of them, but it's like the closest friends. So that was interesting to me as well. Then he goes through on cross and contrasts her relationship with Jen McCabe and Cox versus Karen Reed, because Karen Reed was an outsider, basically not in their inner circle, not from kin. And I thought that was a good point. Then, while they might not be friends with Karen Reed, she gets into how Brian Higgins and Brian Albert were friends. And her husband quibbled with that a little bit, and he's going to bring it out in front of the jury here with her on the stand.
correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you, Your Honor. I believe you testified you knew Brian Higgins at that time, correct?
Yes.
And how did you know him?
He is a friend of my brother-in-law.
And your brother-in-law would be Brian Albert, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, when I just asked you that question about how you knew Brian Higgins and what his relationship was to Brian Albert, you didn't hesitate to say that they were friends, correct?
Correct.
It was very clear that they were friends, correct?
Correct.
In fact, the two of them arrived at the bar together, correct?
Yes.
And it didn't surprise you to see the two of them together, correct?
No.
Karen and John came sometime after that,
I believe shortly after that. Yes.
and they walked over to your table.
Yes.
And then John kind of came up from behind you and sort of in a joking way, dug his finger into your
I
shoulder.
missed the part.
Exact really amount
I swear he says your husband hesitated there or something. I thought I heard that.
of time. She was there a lot. Yes. She was.
You had plans with your sister-in-law, Nicole. You drove her to the waterfall, correct?
Correct.
And the two of you went for dinner there.
Yes.
Your husband, Chris, came later.
Yes.
Brian Higgins came later.
Yes.
And you knew Brian Higgins, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry before
Yes. Well, would be Brian Albert, correct?
Yes.
It was to Brian Albert. You didn't hesitate to say that they were friends, correct?
Correct.
It was very clear that they were friends, correct?
Correct.
In fact, the two of them arrived at the bar together, correct?
Yes.
And it didn't surprise you to see the two of them together, correct?
No.
Karen and John came sometime
I
after.
swear I thought I heard that. Maybe it just entered my mind. So yeah, no hesitation. They are friends. John O'Keefe, Karen Reed were normal that night. And then we get into the timeline. Okay. The timeline that was very, very specifically the same as her husband's. And this cuts both ways. Okay. So they pick hers apart just like they picked her husband's apart. Okay. So that's obviously not great. But what I do give them some respect for is that she very easily could have changed her timeline to make it line up with what she knew was coming in the video from the bar. And she didn't. She stuck to the wrong timeline that she thought it was, and I guess testified that it was all along. So let's hear how the defense breaks down this timeline.
Correct?
Correct.
Now, at some point, your husband, Chris, came home.
Yes.
You testified on direct examination that Chris came home at 12:10 a.m. on January 29th.
That's what time I believe he did. Yes.
So that 12:10 a.m. time, did you discuss that precise time with anybody prior to taking the stand yesterday?
No.
Was that coordinated with anybody such that your husband and you gave the same time, 12:10 a.m.?
No.
Not coordinated, but even if it was, it's the wrong time, right? We know objectively, since we have the video, that it's the wrong time, and she still said the wrong time. To me, it kind of adds to the credibility. I don't know.
With the court's permission, I'd like to play the waterfall bully video. I think it's exhibit 53, just that portion.
And we know
that the waterfall is very close to D&E Pizza, correct?
Correct.
But your house on Maple Street is about a half mile away from the waterfall. Would you agree with that?
About that, yes. Maybe a little less, but about that.
All right. Would you agree it's a 7 or 8 minute walk home from the waterfall if you're walking? I realize you were driving, but if somebody were walking, it's about 7 or 8 minutes?
Maybe a minute or two less.
Okay. So you would say 6 or 7 minutes would be a better estimate to cover that half mile?
Depends on how fast you walk, yes.
And it was snowing that night, correct?
Correct.
The ground was a little bit slippery.
Yes.
If I may cut more.
clearly they're trying to say it took him longer than 6 or 7 minutes on redirect. It was a good question by the Commonwealth. They're like, when it's cold outside, do people usually walk slower or faster? And she's like, definitely faster. Yeah, because you want to get to the house and get in. So I guess that makes sense. Are these 1 or 2 minutes really going to make the biggest difference in the world for the defense? Or are they trying to poke holes and show just a little bit of inconsistency or how the timelines don't match up? I'm still open to see, because honestly, I don't feel like the Commonwealth, I'll sit here, as I sit here today, okay, after 9 days now of the Commonwealth's case, I have no clue when they believe Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe in the yard of 34 Fairview. I have no idea. Unless I missed it in some of this testimony. You guys may have an idea from, researching the case on the outside before it got here. But I have literally no idea when they say Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe in the yard. Because if they all left about the same time, I'm assuming they had to go there and it happened like right then at 12, whatever, which is when Colin would have left, right? So, I don't know. It's a very murky, situation for me. And people are saying, oh, just wait until you hear why. Wait until you hear why. Timeline is important. I'm assuming the timeline is important. I'm assuming. But I don't know what their timeline is yet. Like, you would think they would give a timeline at some point in the first 9 days of testimony.
If I could have the lights dimmed again. This is the exhibit I'd like to show you, ma'am. And if you pause 1 second. Do you recognize what's the picture?
It's okay. They're going to show he actually walks out at 12:14.
Okay,
We knew that.
Husband left the waterfall at about 12:13 and 46 seconds.
Well, yes. That's what it says on the screen.
Okay. So it was closer to 2:14 than to 2:10. Would you agree with that?
12:14, you mean? Two?
You know what? You're right. 12:14 than 12:10.
Yes, that's what I'm seeing.
Thank you. So if he's leaving at around 12:14, and by your testimony, it would have taken him he was walking home. You knew that, correct?
Yes,
He didn't have a car that night.
he did not.
And if it took him 6 or 7.
So, and also, like, he gets home at 12:20, 15 minutes. Colin gets home at, 12:35-ish or 12:40. Okay, fine. But then Brian Higgins, we learn later, doesn't leave till 1:30 or something. So it's not adding up to me. I don't get it. But I'm hoping the prosecution is the one that's going to actually tell us when this happened and not just leave it for the defense to, explain why it can't be true. It kind of makes the defense's job hard to disprove the timeline when we don't even know what the Commonwealth's timeline is.
7 minutes to get home. And by the way, let me strike that question. You had said it takes 6 or 7 minutes. Did you factor in the fact of the weather that night for your estimate about a 6 or 7 minute walk?
Objection.
Can you answer that question? Is that what you said?
Yes, I didn't factor in I don't know.
All right, so your testimony, you don't know if it would have taken him a little bit longer, or anybody.
Everyone walks at a different pace.
Right, but whatever pace they walk at, you given what you saw of the weather that night, is it your testimony that maybe it would have taken a little bit longer than the estimate?
It could have.
Okay, but in any case, let's leave it at 6 or 7 minutes. That puts your husband coming home at around 12:20 or 12:21, correct?
Correct.
All right, and that 12:10 estimate that you had, you made that estimate before having the benefit of the video, correct?
Correct.
Now, where were you within the house when your husband came home?
In my room. Upstairs in my bedroom.
And you share a bedroom with your husband?
Yes.
And when was the first time that you saw him within the house?
He came up to the bedroom.
Okay, so you were in the bedroom and you see him appear in the bedroom.
Correct.
Did you hear the door open way down on the first floor?
Yes.
Okay. And it would have taken him maybe about a minute to get upstairs. It wasn't very long?
It wouldn't be very long, no.
Okay. And when he got upstairs, you noticed that he was in wet clothing, correct?
Yes.
He appeared to be cold.
Yes.
And he got undressed, correct?
Yes.
Did he brush his teeth before bed?
I think he got right into bed.
Okay, so you didn't see him brush his teeth or wash up?
No.
And were you in the bed when he came into the bed to go to sleep?
I was sitting up in bed. Yes.
Were you reading or watching TV?
I was just sitting up in bed praying for my headache to go away.
Oh, okay. So the migraine was still really
Yes.
bothering you, and you were suffering at that point.
Suffering? I had a headache.
Well, yeah, but a migraine headache, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
It was a headache, but I took medicine and I was waiting for it to get better.
To kick in?
Yes.
Okay. And that's sort of what you were concentrating on. It's really kind of hard to read or watch TV or concentrate on anything when you have a migraine, right?
Okay. Yes.
Now,
Makes a good point that nobody's sitting there like staring at the clock again. You know, a lot of this is the same with the timeline. They pick it apart the same way. Then she kind of goes through the layout of the house, which we heard a couple times today. We'll listen to it just real quick one time on the layout of inside the Alberts home.
that form to block the jury. I'm so sorry. It's good I didn't trip.
That was also
The,
another good part by
yes,
Kennedy.
you knew
Like,
that,
oh, it's bad form to block the jury.
Prior to Brian Albert and oh, I'm sorry. That's really bad form to block the jury. I'm so sorry. It's good I didn't trip. The door that is the front door, having been familiar with that house for a long time, you've gone in that front door before, correct?
Yes.
And you know that when you go in the front door of that house, you come into a little foyer area, correct?
Correct.
And then almost within arm's distance to the left is the door to the basement, correct?
Walking in the front door, arm's distance to the left.
Yes. In other words, you walk into the house.
Yep.
And then the door to the basement, going down to the basement, is right there on the left, correct?
That's incorrect. To the left is a library.
Right. Where is the door to the basement?
You walk in the front door, you step to the right, walk a few steps towards the kitchen, and the basement door is on the left before you enter the kitchen.
But the kitchen's off to the left, correct?
No, when you walk in the front door, the library is on the left. There's another room on the left.
Okay.
So you walk in, you immediately see a staircase in front of you,
Yeah.
and to the left is the library.
Right.
If you go to the right,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
if you go to the right, you can go into the part of the kitchen where the kitchen table is, or you can not go to the right, you can walk straight, and as you're walking, there's a door on the left, and that's where the basement door is.
Okay, so I think we're getting to what I was getting at. If you walk straight ahead, there's a door to the left that goes down to the basement, correct?
Correct. Yes.
We got
All right, so we got a little layout of the house. We get a little more as it goes. But then one of the more interesting parts is who contacted who, when stuff starts getting spread, text messages that may have been deleted. This is a really interesting part of Cross, in my opinion, the most interesting part of today's Cross of this witness.
And when you were walking towards
GP said, Lally said in opening 12:45. That's what I thought I remember, but I haven't heard anybody testify to anything like that, right? So I'm waiting for them to actually build it with evidence. I don't know. Alex said, had no clue about this case, but I can say the defense put doubt on the son brawling with the victim that night. It does seem like a cover up to me. I don't know. I don't feel like the defense has proven much yet either, except that I don't know what the prosecution, I think the prosecution is doing a good, putting most of their effort and energy into disproving what the defense is arguing. Jilly said Boston has a long history of corrupt cops. There's tons of movies and documentaries about it. And if it turns out to be a cover up, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Born and raised 45 minutes from Boston. I mean, definitely a lot of movies on it. That's all I can say. But it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Ashley, why isn't the defense asking about people taking off their shoes when entering the house? I don't know. They talked about it with John O'Keefe, but they didn't talk about it with Brian Albert. So that's a good, I don't know if that's a thing. I have no idea. Crystal, could the timestamps on the video be wrong? This investigation was so crappy, I would not be surprised if they didn't confirm the time. Could be, but usually you get this as a record from the establishment. So the Commonwealth or law enforcement doesn't have anything to do with it. It'd be pretty tough to edit that, I think, and make it, look quite as smoothly as it did here. John said, is the defense stretching knowing that 3 EMTs and firefighters heard Karen admitting hitting him to now a dog caused this? Talk about coming out of left field. I don't know. I mean, I could tell the dog stuff was coming based on the injuries to his arm, that's where the defense was going, I think. That's where I thought the dog came into play. I think that the I hit him admission is far from proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I think different people heard different things. It was loud. It was hard to hear what was going on. It was definitely hard to hear what was going on with some of the evidence that we hear later on in the video. But let's get to the best part across, in my opinion.
side door, you didn't see any emergency or police vehicles outside, correct?
No, I did not.
You didn't see any first responders other than Brian Albert, correct?
Correct.
There were no lights flashing outside the house, correct?
Correct.
And inside, you saw Nicole Albert,
Yes.
Brian Albert,
Yes.
Jennifer McCabe,
Yes.
Matt McCabe,
Yes.
and Brian Higgins, correct?
Yes.
How long did you spend at the house that morning?
I don't remember exactly. Maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. I don't remember exactly.
And the seven.
How long did you spend at the house that morning? A half hour, 45 minutes? I'm pretty sure the Alberts later testify, or I'm not the Alberts, just which Albert? Which Albert is it? Nicole Albert said that she was there for 2 hours, I think. I think that's what she said. Oof. This is tough, man. When you have this big of a discrepancy in timelines, in this case, it's just a lot for the defense to work with.
You were discussing what had happened, correct?
Yes.
At some point, it was decided.
Bodie says, does all this stuff really matter? Again, it's important to get stuff right and be on the right timeline, but I'll tell you what matters is that the prosecution is not proving their case yet. That's really why it matters. Because if the prosecution's timeline is totally off, all of this could be really important. If it doesn't matter and there's something more that we haven't seen yet, then maybe it won't matter. It's not a smoking gun by any stretch of the imagination, in my opinion.
Jennifer McCabe should contact Michael Lank of the Canton Police. At some point, it was decided that Jennifer McCabe should contact Michael Lank of the Canton Police, correct?
Objection.
I'll let, if this witness knows independently.
Can you repeat that once more, please?
At some point, it was decided among the seven of you that Jennifer McCabe should contact Michael Lank of the Canton Police Department.
I don't remember who exactly Jennifer decided. Yeah, I don't remember exactly the discussion.
They decided to call their buddy, call the guy that has helped Chris Albert out before, call the guy that makes things go away and isn't afraid to allegedly abuse his power of his badge.
You knew Michael Lank, correct?
Yes.
And at 8:53 a.m., you sent to Jennifer McCabe Michael Lank's personal cell phone number, correct?
Correct.
And did you then see Jennifer McCabe delete that text message from you?
Objection.
I'll sustain.
That's wild. First off, no reason to sustain that. Absolutely no. I was racking my brain. And he said, did you see it? I guess the only objection is outside the scope of her knowledge, but she would just say, no, I didn't see it. And the judge has already instructed the jury that the questions are not evidence. You're allowed to ask that question. Did you see her delete the text message? The answer is no. That's absolutely relevant. Did she delete the text message where you were sending her a number of the officer?
You were contacted by the Massachusetts State Police this year about your phone, correct?
Correct.
They left you a voicemail on March 21st of 2024?
The state police
Yes.
about my telephone?
Well, they left you a voicemail on March 21st of 2024. You had contact with the state police this year.
Yes.
And they left you a second voicemail on March 25 and then called you again on March 28.
Yes.
You told them that you were sick and you would speak to them on April 1st, correct?
Correct.
And then the state police called you on April 1st, but you did not pick up. Do you recall that?
I do not.
They called you again that same day and you didn't respond, correct?
I don't recall.
But you did learn that they had called your husband on April 1st looking for you, correct?
I don't recall.
All right. After speaking with your husband, you texted the Massachusetts State Police on April 1st, correct?
I think around that. I don't know the exact date.
All right. And you finally met with the Massachusetts State Police on April 3rd of 2024, correct?
I would assume. I don't know the exact date, but yes.
And during that meeting, the state police looked through your phone for contact that you would have had with Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
Did they seize your phone?
No, they did not.
Did they tell you that they had a search warrant for your phone?
No, they did not.
Did they take it back saying that they had to give it to some experts to do an extraction?
Objection.
Sustain.
They just looked through it after you handed it to them, correct?
Correct.
Then they gave.
So this tells me a couple things. Number one, cops were definitely not looking at her for anything. They weren't investigating her for anything. And the defense is going to say that was wrong. They didn't do a thorough investigation. They should have done it. She gave them their phone. Fine. That's fine. I get it. But it also says to me that right here and multiple times in Nicole and Brian Albert's testimony that's coming next, I'm thinking to myself, back to that earlier cop that was like, come on, Mr. Attorney. You know we didn't have probable cause. You know we couldn't have searched that house. It's like everything they're saying to me says you absolutely could have searched that house without a warrant that day. Just by asking. They're giving you their phone. They're letting you come in their house. They're offering up statements. I am getting more and more confident that they would have let you search that house without probable cause. At least based on what they're testifying in court today. So that was another interesting aspect of this whole phone ordeal, that they didn't do the extraction like they maybe should have.
Yes.
Now, with regard to your contact with Karen on January 28th, it was clear to you that Karen did not appear to be under the influence, correct?
Correct.
You didn't see her stumbling, correct?
Correct.
You didn't see her swaying.
Correct.
She was not unbalanced.
No.
She was not slurring words.
No.
She was not talking gibberish.
No.
She was engaging in normal conversation.
Yes.
And she held the conversation perfectly fine.
Yes.
She appeared to be under control, correct?
Yes.
She was affectionate with John that night.
Objection.
I didn't come in contact with them like that.
Well, the two of them certainly were not arguing.
No, not that I saw.
You didn't see any tension between them, correct?
No.
And I mean,
All right. So again, I thought that was the most important part of her cross, with the phone number and link and the deleting of the phone number. I mean, it just doesn't smell right. None of that really smells right to me. And they all have these phone numbers and these connections with these officers. And it's like, she's got his number because he's hooked it up for us before. I don't know. Elizabeth, I don't know if I thought it was quite that mic drop of a moment, especially because this isn't, necessarily the main person they're pointing the finger at. But Melly said, who does a cover up and then leaves the body on their own property? No way. I agree. There are things that aren't making sense to me yet either with the defense's theory. I agree with you. There are some weird things. It's like, the Dane Cook skit where it's like, you don't do a B&E in your favorite shirt. It's like, this doesn't make the best sense to me, but you also don't have a ton of options, because if you move them and you put them in your car and all this stuff happens, it's like DNA in your car. I mean, there's no perfect scenario. I don't know. I guess some people think it was a purposeful killing, but seems more plausible that it was accidental. But we'll see. We'll see. Redirect, you walk faster when it's cold. And she talks to other friends more than she talks to Proctor's sister. Then we get to, and John sent me a couple of the voting updates, and the vast majority want just clips of this. So we're just going to do a couple clips of the little mini hearing that they stopped court for today to discuss whether or not a journalist in the courtroom could or needed to be removed because of potential witness intimidation charges. This is the first I was hearing of any of this. So this is kind of wild. And we're going to listen to this and react to it together.
Excuse. Okay, so why don't counsel identify yourselves, please?
Sure. Adam Lally for the Commonwealth, Your Honor.
Karen McLaughlin for the Commonwealth.
So
And this guy
Commonwealth,
represents that
so
journalist,
I do want to say
this lawyer with the white hair, taller guy in the back.
question before we begin. Commonwealth, in your motion to exclude an individual charged with witness intimidation in connection with this case from the courtroom during the testimony of certain witnesses, before we begin, are you advancing the concerns of the DA's office or the concerns of the witnesses themselves, or both?
Both, Your Honor.
Okay, so
If I may, I'm sorry to jump in, but just if I may, I
Sure.
do have what I think is a pretty substantial procedural objection.
Okay.
Maybe I'd ask that you sort of just make a quick bifurcation of the issues here, and we can address the procedural issue before we get into the substance of Superior Court today, completely unrelated to Mr. Carney, my client, as you know, in the other matters.
Mr. Carney is the journalist they're trying to remove for witness intimidation.
And I was here today on the matter of Commonwealth versus Tylee Curry for a motion to suppress. And
which is a case that I am in the middle of
Right.
that motion to suppress with you.
Exactly. And I actually figured that we wouldn't do the motion and get a date. But I was fully focused on that matter and had no notice whatsoever that the Commonwealth was in the Reed matter, was seeking to exclude my client as a journalist from this courtroom. The first thing is that, and I know the court has a job to do in terms of ruling on this motion, and that's fine. And I asked that the ruling be that it be denied on procedural grounds. The procedural grounds are, Judge, that there's been no service of process whatsoever on a case where the government is seeking to essentially trample all over my client's First Amendment rights as a journalist. On 15 minutes notice. I know you gave me the thing 15 or 20 minutes ago.
And it's more than half an hour, but I understand.
All right, well, you get the point. So, this is not something that I can process and absorb and make any sort of cogent arguments on the merits of the motion on that time period. And I'm sure that the court respects that. I'm trying to address it as best I can, but I think that the procedural issues here should control. And here's the procedural situation, Your Honor. That the government filed this 6-page motion. There's a footnote 2 that refers to them serving this motion on May 8th to the Associated Press. Why they couldn't just pull up my email and serve me is an open question that I'd like an answer to in open court. So they can serve the
Their answer is they procedurally have to serve the Associated Press, and they didn't know if he still represented him at the time just because he represented him on other issues.
AP 2 days ago, but they can wait and not even serve me with the motion when I get here to court today.
It is Bush League. I mean, it's technically a legal argument, but it's like, come on, just serve it to him too. Why would you not did you want to have this like whole thing pop up and make a circus out of it? I don't know. I mean, doesn't make sense.
Completely unrelated matter, I might add. So there's some funny business going on here. And, there's been nothing but funny business from where I sit, from the Commonwealth on Mr. Carney's matters. And here we go again. So I don't appreciate that from counsel, from the Norfolk County DA's office, number one. Number two, Your Honor. Mr. Carney has covered this case and written about 350.
So the other main argument that he makes is this is res judicata, meaning this has come before other courts and they have already made the decision that Mr. Carney can sit in and report on this case. He did it all appropriately. He did it all above board. He has his position rightfully sitting there to cover the case, as he's been covering this case for years, potentially. And then let's listen to the Commonwealth's response.
Is essentially a substantial reason. Substantial reason, Your Honor, being that Mr. Carney has been indicted and has open cases for intimidating witnesses, specifically witnesses in this case.
I mean, that's kind of unusual, right? Like a guy in the courtroom that has been indicted and has open cases for witness intimidation, specifically on this case. Now, he's not just some guy, right? So that's interesting. What's he doing to intimidate the witnesses? I don't know. There's some aspects of this that I don't know, obviously, without all the factual background, but that's obviously not great. Although in this case, especially with the allegations of the cover-up and we have witness intimidation, sounds very familiar to me that another police officer that's already taken the stand may have leveled at some people in retaliation that eventually got thrown out. So I don't know. I feel a little bit uneasy on both sides of this.
He has confirmed statements indicating publicly that his actions that he's taken in regard to those indictments were to prevent the case from ever going to trial and to intimidate those witnesses. Those witnesses will be called to testify in this case. And what the Commonwealth is simply requesting is that he be excluded physically from the courtroom, not excluded from watching the trial, not excluded from covering the trial, but excluded physically from the courtroom while those witnesses are testifying from the stand.
And the witnesses you told me have expressed concern. What do you say about that?
Yes, Your Honor. The witnesses have expressed concern.
But this is a bigger deal, right? Commonwealth saying something, but the witnesses expressed concern. The witnesses have expressed concern that if he's there, he's already done stuff, I guess. So this is really tough, right? Because if it becomes a major face, right? And they are pro-defense, anti-Commonwealth, and says something or does something that maybe wouldn't ordinarily turn into charges, and the Commonwealth decides to file charges before the case, is that just a way of stepping on somebody's First Amendment rights to get them out of the courtroom? Because you talk to those witnesses, they say they're scared of him, and therefore he's kept out of the courtroom. Because we don't want to do that. And it would be obvious if this was something that was done all over the place and everybody does it all the time, and it would be a problem and people would object. But I don't like the idea that if there's somebody that's loud against you, that you come up with a procedural reason to keep him out of the courtroom. So they're not asking him to be out of the courtroom for the whole case, but just for the witnesses. And they're going to list which witnesses it is that are in fear of him. And so let's just keep listening to their argument.
The Commonwealth is concerned as to his presence affecting their testimony or their ability to recall. And for all of those reasons,
cross-examination has affected a lot of witnesses' ability to recall. Not anybody sitting in the gallery. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch, that because he's sitting in the room with all these other cops and first responders and Bostonians, that they're really scared that they're not going to recall something. I don't want to dismiss people's fears, but feels like a stretch.
Would submit the administration of justice and the witnesses being able to testify, as well as the witnesses' own concerns, are more than meet the test of the substantial reason for Mr. Carney's exclusion during the course of their testimony.
Okay. Mr. Radel?
Your Honor, the witness's concern has no legal materiality under the law. So the answer that I have is, so what?
I mean, that's pretty strong to just say, so what? They don't have any rights, but the court does have the obligation to protect the witnesses and make sure it's a fair trial, that they're coming and able to testify It's the same way a witness shouldn't be able to testify if they're drunk or high, because their testimony is less reliable. So if the Commonwealth is arguing the witness's testimony will be less reliable because he's in the courtroom, theoretically it's an argument, but it really depends on the factual basis behind those charges. It depends on how strong those charges are, the reasonable likelihood that they're going to be successful, or if they're just bogus charges that are going to be dismissed later. That's pretty tough. I don't love that. I don't love that.
The witness's concern, where does that fit into the law here, Your Honor? This matter has been adjudicated twice. Mr. Carney has the right to speak on the case. He's gone through all the proper channels to be here. He is not in any way wants to or is trying to make any issue of his presence here. And he's just trying to cover the case.
The guy does something crazy, right? If this guy, Carney, I can't tell if it's Kearney or Carney, but if this guy like jumps over the railing and comes out a witness, he's getting arrested. They're going to file charges. He knows that, I'm sure, if they file these witness intimidation charges, number one. Number two, he's going to get kicked out and not be able to come back to the courtroom at all. If he violates any of the court orders or rules, he knows he's on thin ice and he's out. So as long as he's not doing any of that. Somebody said he's accused of intimidation, not convicted. I thought that's what I said. If I said convicted, that was my mistake. I knew he's only been accused or alleged. That's why I keep saying if these charges get thrown out, which has already happened with cops in this case. So it's going to be interesting. Shane said stopping Turtle Boy from going to court is just adding fuel to the fire for conspiracy theories. I agree. It's just like some of the objections. It's not a great look. And I'm just calling him Kearney because I don't know if Turtle Boy is like a negative nickname for him or whatever. I don't know. I haven't been following. I try not to call people names. I don't know. I don't like to use words I don't know the meaning. Shane said he was a journalist asking questions, and because they were cops, they said he was intimidating them. He was a journalist asking questions. Yeah. And Shane, where have we heard that similar story like that before? Right?
As best he can. And this is just a personal vendetta that's been carried out by the Norfolk County DA's office against Mr. Carney. And, this is where the court needs to hold the line on the First Amendment. This witness intimidation statute, Your Honor, is an absolute abomination. It is going to be struck down. It's just a matter of time. And this is just a continuation of everything the special counsel's been doing to Mr. Carney. Now the office itself is doing it. There's no reason for this motion to be allowed, Your Honor. There's no discomfort exception to the First Amendment, Your Honor. There's been absolutely nothing advanced, especially on an emergency basis, which is, I assume, why this is being done with no notice. There's been no establishment of any emergency. There's been no conduct whatsoever on the part of Mr. Carney to justify this motion. And I did happen to see some reference to the Chestnut trial about published something to the effect of doxing a seated juror. That is false. Mr. Carney wrote a story on a juror.
This is on a separate
In this, you all know I was the judge. I am not considering
He's
that.
not going to consider that anyways. No Stray said after the blogger was charged with witness intimidation, wasn't a bail condition to stay away from the witnesses? I don't know. I haven't seen that, if I'm being honest. I haven't seen what the conditions of his bail are.
Experience in this motion.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further, Mr.
Nothing further.
Bradle?
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Bradle, I agree with you that Mr. Kearney is certified by the Office of Public Information pursuant to SJC Rule 119, and that he has a right to be here today. He arrived timely, and that he is registered. I have honored
I
that.
thought she was going to let him stay. I was like, oh, wow. I even typed in my notes. Judge said he can stay, but I was wrong.
119 registration today, and I will continue to honor that. However, my role in this case, Commonwealth versus Karen Reed, is to assure that the defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial are honored and upheld. And because of the chilling effect that Mr. Kearney's presence, I find, will have on the witness's testimony, I'm going to excuse him while the named witnesses in the Commonwealth's motion, Julie Nagel, Christopher Albert, Colin Albert, Michael Proctor, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Brian Albert, and Yuri Buchanan. And the Commonwealth also today requested Nicole Albert because of the incidents that reportedly have been held at her home. I'm going to excuse him during all of that testimony. Now, in my media...
That's like everybody, right? I mean, it's not everybody, but that's a huge group of witnesses that he can no longer sit in the courtroom for. And Future said, why would they grant him a pass if they knew that there was this other case against him involving witnesses and it might be an issue? If they were that concerned, why grant him the press pass? My guess would be, and I'm only guessing, that there's nothing in denying press passes with this type of stuff. It's not an automatic denial. And if it's not an automatic denial, it makes it even less likely that this should be so. But I get the plausible argument for the judge if this was like real witness intimidation where he's showing up with weapons at somebody's houses and threatening them. I'm assuming that's not what this is, which I don't like to assume. So I'm going to have to kind of leave it open for that. Nunzio said, Dr. Turtleboy is his YouTube. He fully believes in the cover-up. Okay. So he calls himself Turtleboy as well. All right. That makes me feel better about saying Turtleboy. I also would just prefer to call him Kearney, if I'm being honest.
Order, if you have it, I'm sure your client has it because they're handed out to the press. Under number 1, I say that anyone leaving the courtroom to the media during the trial proceedings may lose their seat and may not be permitted re-entry unless there is available seating. That will not happen to Mr. Kearney. I will not take away his seat today. For other witnesses who are not subject to this order, that seat will remain empty. No other person of the media will be able to take that seat in his absence. Okay?
Your Honor, one last thing, if I may, just came to me as I was standing here. Extension in the same regard as to Nicole Albert for the address would be Brian Albert Jr., son of Brian and Nicole Albert.
All right.
Add another witness to the list. And she's saying, so like, he's not going to lose his seat if he moves his feet.
It's for the same reason. So Brian Albert Jr. All right. So those are my findings, Mr. Bradel. It should give you enough to seek appellate action if you wish. Okay. All right. Thank you for being here. All right.
I disagree with that. I think there was less restrictive measures she could have taken. Like maybe he's got to sit in the furthest chair or something when those witnesses are not being in eye shot. And so I don't know, but I don't know.
So I'll take a short recess. We can bring.
There's a short recess next. And what do we have? We have got Nicole Albert coming up next. Married to Brian Albert, owner of 34 Fairview at the time. Talk about their sons, military service again, which again is a good look for the jury usually. Same description of that night. Didn't know John O'Keefe well and just met Karen Reed that night, basically. She talks about the layout of the home again. And then I thought she had an interesting just kind of description of how people left the house, which I think is important as well for a timeline that I'm still waiting for the Commonwealth to connect, but still we kind of get our first explanation of who left her house when.
I'm going to end your answer there. Next question, Mr. Lally.
Prior to your daughter Caitlin leaving, let me ask you this. As far as people leaving from your house, what was sort of the order of how people left and when people left?
I believe Brian Higgins left first, approximately 1:30ish. Then Jennifer and Nat.
So again, if he's hit and laying in the yard at 1:30, and I'm just putting this together for the first time myself, so bear with me, all of you guys that are like, catch up, Peter, we already know all this. But, you know, I'm learning some of the timeline today for people inside the house of when people left. But if Higgins left at 1:30, you know, Colin apparently left earlier, 12:30. If Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe at 12:45-ish, and this guy leaves at 1:30, and everybody basically at 12:15, 12:30, whatever, said the snow was just starting to pick up, Chris Albert was still walking home an hour before this. So from 12:45-ish to 1:30, that 45 minutes was going to be enough snow to cover him to where people wouldn't see him in the yard. I find that hard to believe. Especially all the people that walk out. Now, at 6 a.m. or whenever first responders come, I could understand why there's no footsteps if the snow had covered the footsteps. I get that. But very strange. And then the snow plow and all the other people that didn't see the body in the yard either is very strange.
And Brian's two friends left 12:45, 12:50, and then, or 1:45, 1:50, I'm sorry. And then Caitlin was probably closer to 2.
And when your daughter Caitlin left, who, if anyone, was
Caitlin left at 2.
left downstairs and sort of awake between yourself and the other people that lived there?
Just me.
So your son and your husband have both gone up to bed at that point?
Yes.
And at any point in time, but you mentioned that there were a number of people that were sort of around the table in the kitchen, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes, sorry.
where did anybody else go sort of around your house?
I know at one point, my husband and his friend Brian were in our family room. So I kind of went in there and was talking to them. We had some shelves on the wall that just had a bunch of pictures, old pictures from our wedding or when Brian was in the Marine. So we would just kind of look at them, laugh and talking about them. We stood.
And then she kind of talks about people's movements around the house, which again, we'll get into why that might be important if, you know, she took her eyes off her husband and his friend, which, you know, every wife does, I assume, when we're hanging out with our buddies at the house, not like you're watching over us the whole time. The defense obviously is indicating stuff could have happened that she wouldn't see, but she is positive and swears, her and her husband both, that John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never came in their house that night. Okay. No surprise there that that's what they're going to testify to. Totally normal night. She went to bed around 2:30 a.m. She didn't hear any screeching. She didn't hear any yelling. She didn't hear anything loud or somebody getting hit by a car or yelling or a thud or speeding off or brakes or anything like that. And she went to bed at 2:30. So she would have heard that. Somebody should have heard that, right? If there were a bunch of people in the house. Jennifer McCabe comes bursting in her bedroom at 6 a.m. They had no clue what was going on. Lank came in the house and asked them some questions. Again, sounds like they would have consented to a search. Higgins came over. And again, if Higgins left their house at 1:30, how could he be at the police station at 1:30? We'll get into all those discrepancies at some point, I guess. She says Julie was there an hour or two, which again, I think is a lot longer than Julie said. No one really uses the area of the house where John O'Keefe's body was found. They moved in April. They always planned to move. Kids were older. They got it, husband's brother got a good deal when he sold his house. On Cross, no tension between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, no drunkenness. She saw her husband and Higgins fooling around. Again, those feel like reaches to me. The fact that your husband, I thought just personally, okay, the line of questioning of your husband is a highly trained fighter, and then having this witness argue with her, and it's like he's got some boxing experience and he was in the military, so he knows how to fight, but a highly trained fighter is kind of subjective and vague, and it leaves opening for witnesses to argue with you on cross, which, sometimes people don't love. But I get it. We can see what they do end up getting as far as the experience fighting post sidebar.
Correct. Ms. Albert, your husband has boxing experience, correct?
Yes.
He also has fighting experience from his training in the military, correct?
I don't know what fighting experience from the military means. I mean, he was in the Marine Corps. He was out of the Marine Corps in 1992.
But he had training through the Marine Corps and through the Boston Police Department with fighting and defensive tactics, correct?
I assume so.
Ms. Albert, you testified earlier that you left the waterfall around, I believe, 11:45. Is that correct?
No, I said I think closer to 12.
Okay. Could I show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 53? Your Honor, could I have permission to publish Exhibit 53?
Okay.
Mr. Bates, if I could have you start the video at 5:14. If you could pause. This video?
No, I don't.
So as you can see, and somebody else posted on here, outside the bar footage, barely snowing unless big storm hit. So I think a big storm did hit. Timing of it, again, is going to be important. And that's, I think, why they're focusing on these witnesses in the snow so much. Catherine said, does the defense lawyer need to show some proof that CA was flipping off John, throwing beer bottles in the bushes, et cetera, to ask the questions? So no, he doesn't have to show proof to ask the questions. But he does have to. It sounds like the judge is not going to allow him to argue it in closing argument at this point because he's only asked it. The answer was no when he was asked those questions. So that's not evidence because his questions are not evidence. And if it's facts, not an evidence, you can't argue those facts in closing. You are allowed to make inferences or argue things that would be reasonable inferences from the facts. So that might be an argument the defense lawyers make, is that these things are reasonable inferences from the facts. And I think that might be a good argument, but this judge might not allow it. Pesky pirouette. What was Brian Albert looking at in his lap today? I'm not sure. Gabby, on holes in Karen Reed's theory, I don't think it's that he was killed and left outside, but that he was injured inside and they sent him out into the cold, causing the death. I don't know, honestly. I don't know. Based on what's been presented at trial, I don't think they've proven that yet. So we'll see if there are more facts that come out and it ends up proving that. So this was a really great part of cross, I think. There was a point in the testimony where she describes the cars that are outside her house. And she describes cars that are all big. They're all SUVs, a Ford Explorer, a Ford Escape. I drive a big Cadillac SUV. And then my husband's work car was outside. I was like, okay, I didn't think much of it. But on cross, when you leave stuff like that out, good defense lawyers can drive a truck through it. And that's what happened.
Back on and okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Let me switch gears a little bit. You testified earlier that there are 4 cars. They're usually parked in the driveway at 34th Avenue, correct?
Yes.
And you listed at least the make and model of about 3 of those vehicles.
Yep.
Do you recall that?
Yep.
You said there's a Cadillac that usually is parked in the driveway. There's a Ford Explorer, and there's a Ford Escape, correct?
Yep.
But you also said there's a 4th car. That's your husband's work vehicle.
Yes. Yep.
What type of car is that?
That's a Ford Edge.
Oh, a Ford Edge, huh? So this is why, again, when I said in the beginning, when the defense has their opening statement, and I don't know anything about this case, I have tried to stay away from it as much as possible. They said Ford Edge. Very importantly, we don't know whose Ford Edge or who was driving it, but we know when it was there at an important time and where it was parked. So that Ford Edge was already in our mind, right? From opening. And now we hear it's the one car that she did not say the make and model of. Did they think the defense wasn't going to ask that? I don't understand. That's something the Commonwealth should have gotten ahead of. That's easy to get ahead of. Just ask that question. And then it's not as big of a deal. But they didn't. And my guess is the jury's ears perked up when she said Ford Edge.
A black Ford Edge.
Yes. Yep.
Is there a reason that you didn't want to state or commit to that in front of this jury when you originally testified?
No, there's no reason. I was just trying to.
And that's a great follow-up question that wasn't objected to. She's like, is there a reason you didn't want to say that? To highlight it even more.
Think of all the different cars. We have 5 kids. We've had a lot of different vehicles. I was just saying it as I remembered it.
News coverage in this case has revealed the importance of a Ford Edge.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
In your mind, a Ford Edge has significance to this case, doesn't it?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, can you answer that? Does the Ford Edge have significance in this case too?
I've heard it talked about.
I didn't know if she was going to give her that answer, but she did. She's heard it talked about.
And what you've heard talked about is that an eyewitness saw.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to stop you on that. The objection sustained.
She got what she needed.
Ms. Al-
She got what she needed, in my opinion. That was pretty good. That was a good job by this attorney. She barely saw Colin. It was weird kind of impeachment that, Colin said somebody was picking him up and it was kind of weird. Why would somebody just drop him off to say happy birthday, then pick him up? And she did say kind of when she was walking in, she almost bumped into him walking out. Somebody was coming to pick him up is what Brian Albert said as well. So, it's kind of interesting. But for the first time, because I've been waiting for it, because I've heard some mentions about the dog, is what is going on with the dog. But first, I want to get to a couple of comments here. Mystery Singer said, Jen McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Googled how long to die in the cold at 2:37 a.m. This is obviously going to be an astronomically huge part of the case. But so far, we have 2 sides saying 2 different things about that, and we don't have the backup for it yet, and she hasn't testified yet. So I'm going to hold off on really digging into that. B&B, hello, thank God it's Friday. Curious, is it right for the judge to keep saying, we're going to speed it along or move it along? Is this fair to Karen Reed? Can defense use this if she's found guilty? Thanks. It doesn't seem like, again, there's a lot of sidebars where we're not hearing what's happening, but it doesn't seem like she's really speeding them up very much. She's letting them do recross, which not all judges do. I don't know if they always allow that in Massachusetts. Only certain cases allow it here and under certain circumstances. I don't think she's done anything to speed the case up unnecessarily so far. And I don't think just her mentioning it is quite major enough. Blessed Mom from Texas said, good to see you, Peter. Turtle Boy is in the chat. Thanks for all you do. I saw a comment come up from Turtle Boy Live. I didn't know if it was like the real person they're talking about because you never know today on the internet. That said, the witness intimidation was me asking them questions and talking about them on my live show. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, is it in law, many times we talk about the reasonableness of charges. So is it reasonable, if this is the facts of the case, for them to be intimidated to the fact that they might change their testimony or not be able to recall things with him being in the same courtroom as them? Knowing, by the way, it's not as if they're blocking his ability to watch the witness because he can watch it on the stream. The judge even said it. The Commonwealth even said it. So he's still allowed to watch. So him watching in another office in the courtroom as opposed to that courtroom, what's the difference in their ability to recall? I don't know. Luna's mom said, pronounced Carney, sorry. Turtle Boy News Daily is his blog. He is not offended by being called Turtle Boy. Yes, I think everybody has let me know that by now. Fazakis Andrea says, no one saw John O'Keefe's body under the snow while he was supposed to be there, established by the prosecution, but Karen Reed saw him. I don't know that much has been established, but we are still going to watch and see how it all kind of continues to unfold here. Okay, So then we get to hear a little bit about Chloe, the dog. Let's jump into the testimony there.
On January 29th, correct?
Yes.
She's a large German Shepherd.
Yep. About 70 pounds.
She's not great with strangers.
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't say that it's kind of a poorly worded question. Would you say that she's good with strangers?
I'd say she's fine with strangers.
Fine with strangers. Okay.
Yep.
She's definitely not good with other animals, is she?
No, she did not like other dogs.
Chloe actually has a well-documented fight history, doesn't she?
Objection.
Does she?
With dogs. A couple dogs, yes.
That's weirder to me than you can have that. We've talked about some of the weird things this judge does, but when there's an objection, and she's like, well, does she? And she kind of asked the question. That's kind of weird to me. Star-Lord said, I'm curious, do you feel the judge has been completely fair and unbiased? Seems like she shuts down the defense quite a bit and sustains almost all of the prosecution's objections. I will tell you, as with most judges, I would say most judges lean prosecution, lean stateside, and lean against the defense. This judge absolutely does not lean toward the defense. I would say she leans against the defense. I don't think she's been the worst and most biased judge we've seen, but I definitely think she's leaning prosecution side. I'm a little surprised about if the connections are actually true with her brother representing in Albert. That's not great. But I don't know. I mean, I definitely think she leans Commonwealth side. I don't know if I think it's quite as far as a lot of people in the chat do yet from what I've seen, right? And you may have seen other hearings that I haven't.
Ms. Albert, she also has a fight history with humans, doesn't she?
Objection.
Ask that differently.
Ms. Albert, Chloe has injured other humans, hasn't she?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
In one incident in May of 22, when she got out and was fighting with another dog, the woman whose dog it was tried to break up the two dogs. And while she was trying to break up the two dogs, she got injured.
There are actually two individuals who are injured in that incident, correct?
So that's interesting that they let it come in, right? Because it's like other discovery about Chloe we'll talk about wasn't turned over necessarily, but they let her get into this, which I think is pretty interesting. And again, the judge probably could have come up with reasons why this is not relevant and kept it out if she was going to be horribly biased. And maybe she did that with other evidence that I'm not hearing about, but pretty interesting.
Well, there was two women, but I believe just one woman, from what I understand, had an injury from Chloe. The other one may have fallen or something, but I'm not sure 100%.
There were two women who were actually taken to the hospital after that incident, correct?
Yes, a neighbor had called the police
That's not good.
or called an ambulance just to make sure they were okay.
And you mentioned that Chloe had actually escaped from the backyard
Mhm.
in that incident.
Yes,
And that happens from time to time in your house, correct?
it had happened a few times, yes.
And Mr. Albert let Chloe out when he arrived that night, correct?
Yep.
Ms. Albert, you don't have Chloe
Okay, there's a little bit more.
anymore, do you?
Nope.
In May of 2022, 4 months after Mr. O'Keefe's death, you got rid of your family dog of 6 years.
Objection.
So is that true? Is that when you got rid of your dog?
I did not get rid of my dog. I rehomed my dog.
She did not get rid of her dog. She rehomed her dog right after this happened or soon after this happened. Which is interesting to me.
Your dog is no longer in the Canton area, correct?
No, but I know where she is. She's in Vermont. And that previous testimony, that information has all been given. So if she was ever needed for anything, we know where she is.
Was that testimony given to the defense?
Probably.
Was I present at the hearing where you testified about this?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Your Honor, can we
They end up having a sidebar because it's very clear that this information was not turned over to the defense. She does later say that she gave it to the Commonwealth, and they ask when. So it's very interesting, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. My guess is the jury understands that the defense didn't have this information. I don't know how important it is, like where she lives now or whatever, because they got into the history of biting and injuring people potentially from this dog, which I think is what they want, but kind of interesting to me. Then they get into some grand jury testimony. Again, how she didn't hear the crash, screaming, brakes, unsure where Brian was, part of the night. Ashley said Jen hysterically busting into the bedroom, 180 for her behavior. No bedroom lights came on. Dog doesn't bark or anything. Too many unanswered questions. Yes. The whole thing about, and they got into it a lot today about how they weren't woken up till 6 a.m. So all the commotion in their front yard, Karen Reed screaming hysterically, either I hit him or did I hit him or is he dead or he is dead. Ambulances showing up, fire trucks showing up, first responders out of the scene, potentially a car accident happening at some point. The dog's not barking while this is going on. Nobody in the house is waking up while this is going on. They show where their bedroom window is, which faces right out to the front yard. The defense is pointing out a lot of things that's just making me think, man, interesting. Interesting, to say the very least. Sergeant Lank impeachment. She told Lank that her daughter left at 12:15. Today, she said her daughter left at 2 a.m. Lank was talking to everybody at the same time, more of a conversation than an interview. She admits that she was basically getting her story straight with her family members. What do you expect? Of course, family members are going to talk about the case, which is one of the themes the defense has been trying to get around this whole time. Then some impeachment on what she told Proctor. She didn't tell him Brian Jr. was there, which seems a little weird since it was like his birthday party thing, or his two friends, or Colin Albert. She does agree that she didn't tell him Colin was there basically because he was just leaving as she was coming, but she thinks she told Proctor that all those other people were there. So again, the theme of potentially protecting the kids, maybe some additional points scored there from the defense. Then some other very interesting part about, this is why phone records are so important. And without it, people could potentially not tell the truth and you wouldn't be able to prove it. But with it, even if they say they don't recall or they don't remember, sometimes coincidences are just too much.
Can I have a moment?
Sure.
Do you quarrel with that?
Said 6, what you say,
Okay. Does that sound about right? Around 6:45 based on video surveillance footage. Would you quarrel with that?
if that's what you say.
Okay. Does that sound about right to you?
Yep. I initially from the beginning just said 6:30. I wasn't quite sure.
So she woke up 6:30 to McCabe barging into her room. That's what she's saying. And they're saying it's probably closer to 6:45, whatever. Point is 6:30, 6:45, barging into the room.
Ms. Albert, what about the two calls that you received from your sister at 6:07 and 6:08 a.m., which were answered?
I never answered any phone calls from my sister that morning.
She knew that question was coming. So she didn't get woken up by any phone calls. She got woken up when somebody walked into the room, yet 2 phone calls to her phone, which they can prove with the phone records, were answered, because you can also prove that with the phone records. Who else was in the room? Brian Albert, her husband. Neither one of them admit or say that they answered either of those phone calls from her sister. Yet somehow the phone picked up.
You're aware that the Celebrate records indicated that you answered 2 calls from your sister.
Objection, Your Honor.
And 6:08 a.m.
The objection sustained.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Okay.
Before. Thank you. May we approach?
Okay.
I'm going to skip this sidebar here.
Okay, and you can give it back to Ms. Albert,
Thank you.
and you can go back and ask a question, and let's see where we go with this, okay?
Ms. Albert, do you recognize this document?
Recognize it?
Do you know what it is?
Well, yeah, I see what it is.
Does it refresh your recollection as to the 2 calls you received on the morning of January 29th?
It says here 2 calls were placed.
Okay, don't read it, but you were asked a specific question, so if you could answer the question, please.
Does that refresh your recollection to the 2 calls you received from your sister on the morning of January 29th?
She may have placed those phone calls to me, but I never answered them.
You received a call from Jennifer McCabe on January 29th at 6:07:42 a.m. that lasted for 9 seconds, correct?
She may have placed a phone call to me. I never answered it. I never spoke to her that morning.
You also received a second call from your sister at 6:08:17 a.m. that lasted for 7 seconds, correct?
Objection.
Go ahead and answer that.
It says that, but I never answered a phone call from my sister Jennifer that morning.
You're aware that cell phone companies have what are called tolling records, correct? That show if there's a voicemail or something of that nature.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Ms. Albert, it's your testimony here today that you never spoke to your sister that morning.
I never spoke to my sister on the phone that morning.
Who else was in?
So D-Nick said, Peter, please explain how this information is kept out, stay by Beth. So she let her get into the important stuff, which was that the phone calls came in and were answered. If it's outside the scope of her knowledge or she says, I don't recall, well, you can't get into it. How the cell phone and Celebrate records work, if she says that she doesn't know, that's outside the scope of her knowledge. So I understand why not to keep pressing on that. Little April said, woot woot, sicken Allen on Brian Albert Monday. Thank you, Peter, for being patient and wise. I don't know about patient and wise, but it is definitely going to be interesting starting out with Cross on Monday. Molly, Peter, how would she know a Ford Edge was mentioned in the case if she wasn't supposed to follow the case? Sorry to catch up. So there's nothing against them watching news articles or talking about the case or following the case. Witnesses can't follow the case during the trial, watching the testimony, watching court. They're talking about the Ford Edge being mentioned way earlier on in the case, I think, and being part of the news interviews very early on, not during opening statements. Sarah Gray said, thank you, Peter, for covering the trial with all of us and for making ONG my birthday with your live stream. Awesome. Happy birthday, Sarah. All right. I think there might be a little bit more I want to listen to here. Nope, that was it. Oh, actually, yeah. Who else was in the room?
In your bedroom that morning.
Me and my husband.
You and Brian Albert were the only two individuals who could have answered those calls that morning, correct?
We're the only two people in the room.
Sounds like a yes. They ended cross by talking about you and your first responder husband didn't go up outside and help John. More on that from Brian Albert's side. Then on redirect, they offered to pay the medical bills when their dog hurt somebody, and they rehomed their dog because they didn't want it to happen again, meaning her hurt somebody else, which I thought was kind of good evidence for the defense. Then Brian Albert takes a stand. And my thought is this literally sets up like a movie. Like when he was taking the stand, I was like, oh man, holy cow, how's this going to go? Right? The dude that owns the house that are talking about the cover up, last name Albert, first name, I was going to go with, a rap quote there, but I won't. But, last name, whatever. And he's going to take the stand, retired Boston police officer. Here we go. Let's see how this goes. Boxer, fighter, whatever. He takes the stand, introduces himself to the jury like a pro. I wasn't planning on playing this, but I kind of want to. So here we go. Listen to how this guy sits down. He was a cop for 30 years, so my guess is he's testified at trial before, and he introduces himself like a pro, and I thought he was a good witness personally. I thought he was a very polished witness, from the way that he was dressed to the way that he answered questions and the way that he presented himself. No cross yet, but on direct. Here he comes.
Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court jury in the case there is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon to the jury.
Good afternoon.
You like that? Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon to the jury. Not too much. Didn't crack a smile. Wasn't jokey at all. Is very serious and professional, but did introduce himself to the jury, which I thought played well personally. Jen, currently not guilty, came in as a juror, but to be fair, my 70-pound pit does not bark at anything, even hid during an attempted break-in, not all bark. 100%. That doesn't prove, the fact that the dog didn't bark doesn't prove anything to me, right? I'm just trying to figure out what they do have that proves this timeline, right? If she was like, my dog woke me up barking at 12:45 and we heard screeching brakes, I was like, what the heck's going on? That's proof that something happened at 12:45, right? So I'm just looking for something, right? Okay, so we go through the same family background again. So much of it is repetitious. That's why we don't have to play a ton of the directs, because once we play one of them, you kind of know what all of them are saying. Weird explanation of his friendship with Higgins, but eventually they got there that they are close. They went to the restaurant bar called Hillside at 9:30. So my guess is and said they had some drinks before. I don't know if that's going to be an issue, that they were maybe more drunk than other people that weren't at other bars before. I don't know. Didn't know who was coming to his house, but knew Higgins was, even though he had never been there before. But tonight was the night he was going to come and hang out. Colin was there, but he was getting picked up, just after midnight. A little bit more talk about Chloe. Higgins left at 1:30 a.m. after the others left after that. Interesting timing. What are we going to get as far as signing into the police station at 1:30? He went upstairs, watched TV in his bedroom. John O'Keefe, Karen Reed never came in his house that night. Awoken by Jen McCabe. It was very much the same as what his wife testified to. He goes downstairs. Lank is in his house. He does know who Lank is. He knows him through Chris Albert. And then there was another officer that he didn't know. Then the most interesting part of his direct to me is how he talks about the conversation they had and how it went, who he called, and what transpired there.
And I knew him to know my brother Chris.
Talking about Lank.
And so knew him essentially when I'm asking, knew him in a professional capacity, personal capacity, or a little bit of both?
I would say more of a professional capacity, and I knew of him, but did not hang out with him socially.
And initially, when you first see Officer Lang, is he by himself or who, if any, other officers?
I believe initially he was by himself.
Did another officer join yourself and Officer Lang at some point?
Yes, I believe another officer came into the house.
You know who that officer is?
I don't.
The way the Commonwealth asked that question almost sounded like 3 cops, like Lank, yourself, and another officer. So 3 officers sat down at the table and started talking.
And as far as them coming into your house, they were welcome in your house? You didn't say get out or close the door or anything like that?
No, of course they were welcome in my house.
Really? So when they came in your house, they were welcome. You didn't close the door in their face? No, of course they were welcome in my house. So that first officer that testified, it's like, you sure you couldn't have searched their house, sir? Even without probable cause? You know, there's a way you can search their house without probable cause. It's called asking. And of course, he would welcome you into his house to search it. Very interesting to me.
And where did you go with the officer, sort of in your house? Where did you spoke with the officer, I presume?
Yes, we spoke in the kitchen area.
And when you're speaking with the officer in the kitchen area, who is there?
So my wife, Nicole, her sister, Jen, and I believe Jen's husband, Matt, arrived almost the same time that I came downstairs, maybe a minute after.
And how long a period of time was this conversation that occurred in the kitchen of your house?
I don't remember the exact time. I wouldn't want to guess. I don't remember. 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe initially.
And when you say initially, was there a subsequent conversation that occurred after that?
Yes. The Officer Lank returned to the house sometime after that.
And when he returned sometime after that, was he alone or was there another officer?
I believe that time he was with a Lieutenant Gallagher, perhaps.
And were you familiar with Lieutenant Gallagher prior to that one?
I knew who Lieutenant Gallagher was on a professional level. I had not hung out with them on a social level.
And again, they were welcomed into your home and you spoke with them, is that correct?
Yes, the second time they were there, they were invited back to the house via a phone call.
And that second conversation within your house, where did that?
Same area, family room, kitchen area.
And if you know about how long a period of conversation was that second come back to the house?
That may have been longer, maybe a half hour.
Now, going back to sort of that initial conversation, as far as, so it's yourself, it's Mr. and Mrs. McCabe, your wife, and then the police, is that correct?
Myself, my wife, Nicole, my sister-in-law, Jen, her husband, Matt, had arrived, and the police, yes.
And in between that first speaking with the police and the second time that the police came back to your house, who, if anyone, did you call or notify in regard to the situation that was going on in front of you?
I called Brian Higgins.
Why did you call Brian?
Because I think it was important for him to know what was going on and that what had happened.
Why? I called Brian Higgins, the guy that's only been to your house one time ever. Friends, but not like best friends. Definitely not best friends with John O'Keefe. It's kind of already been established. They knew each other professionally, whatever. Why would he call Brian Higgins? I don't follow. Maria said, thanks for the recaps, but I'm still confused. I get it. War Critic said, please help me understand why the judge says, do you object to the prosecution every time? I don't feel like she says it every time. If people are trying to say she's trying to help them out, I guess that would be, but I haven't noticed a lot of that, asking if they object personally. Piop said, why didn't they ask if the phone was in the bedroom with them? Maybe someone else answered it. They said you were the only 2 that could answer it, and she said we were the only 2 in the bedroom. So I don't know. I mean, maybe if the jury's picking up on that, they could pick up that nitpick. I kind of got the feeling that she was agreeing it was in their bedroom and they didn't answer it. Lady Law said, frustrating lack of thorough investigation, and the Commonwealth hasn't presented the case to me yet. Any advice addressing bias in this situation? There's just so much of it that I think they really have to be like, it's a small town, everybody knows everybody. Doesn't mean everybody's going to cover up crimes for each other. Like, in order for this to be a cover up, 15 people could potentially go to prison for committing the crime of covering up a murder. I mean, that's probably how I would address it one way or the other. Free Clubber said, rob a house and 4 of my dogs would sleep through it. I get it. Yeah, I get that there are inconsistencies about timing, about location, where they did these interviews, who was even sitting at the interviews, who was sitting at the table versus sitting in this room, when Higgins and Albert were always in her presence or not always in her presence when she was cleaning up the house when she first got home. Tons of inconsistencies.
And as far as you knew with reference to Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed, what, if any, relationship, friendship, anything were you aware of between Mr. Higgins and either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed?
I was not aware too much about a relationship with Brian and either person. Brian had mentioned maybe even that night that he was friendly and knew John. I knew of no relationship between Brian and the defendant.
So I'm still not following why you would immediately call him over anybody. You didn't call O'Keefe's kids. You didn't call anybody related to O'Keefe or related to Karen Reed, who was more directly involved in this potentially.
And following your conversation with Mr. Higgins, what anyone else came over your house?
So Brian Higgins eventually came over to my house, and my sister-in-law Julie also arrived at my house.
And do you know why your sister-in-law Julie came by your house?
Yes.
And why is that?
So she has a routine that when it's someone's birthday, she likes to come by and bring like coffee and donuts. So it was Brian's birthday that night. So my sister-in-law Julie was coming by to drop off some donuts and coffee, I think.
And where was Julie when you first saw her that morning?
She was out front in the driveway.
And what, if anything, did you ask Julie to do when you saw her out?
I asked her to come inside.
And when she came inside, is that when you informed her of what had happened?
Yes, I don't know if it was necessarily me that informed her, but people that were there were explaining to her what happened. It was a very, very chaotic, unbelievably chaotic morning.
And as far
I'm
as
sure it was. Some good points being made by you guys as well. Thought it was weird that Higgins had only been to the house once, but still beat the Alberts to their own house. It's true. Wouldn't pieces of the taillight be right beside the body after Karen Reed allegedly hit the car? Yes and no. Yes, they could be by the body. If you take off, they could fall out of the taillight when you're going over the curb or the yard or back into the street or whatever. So they could be around that area. They shouldn't be too far off. But lots of people seem to have walked all around there and not seen them before the snow was as dense and heavy as it was when first responders arrived. So it's kind of random. Greg, the more the prosecutor's witnesses talked, the more confused I get. The more the prosecution witnesses talk, the more confused I get. I don't know about confused, but the more I'm left wanting more for sure. John, I think one of the biggest issues strives from the cell phone receipts, possibly a huge red flag. Calls are tracked just like accounting credit card transactions. Extremely accurate. Every minute is documented. And it seems like the prosecution witnesses, when they are confronted with that, it's kind of just like, I don't remember what we talked about. Or that's wrong. I didn't pick that up. When a criminal defendant says something like that, everybody assumes they're lying. If a criminal defendant says, no, I realize the records say I picked up the phone, but I didn't. I realize it says the cell phone towers say I pinged there, but I wasn't there. I didn't delete that text message. I don't know why it says I deleted it. I didn't search that on Google at that time. The computer's wrong. We know how most criminal defendants are looked at that way. Vince said, what does the defense team like Miss Reed has cost? Just curious, $500K? More. Izzy said, B. Albert scares me. He's also full of it.
when that was described to your sister-in-law, Julie, how would you describe sort of her demeanor or her reaction to news regarding Mr. Rose?
Shock. That's how I would describe everybody's reaction that morning, was utter shock. She was upset and looked very, very in shock.
And so the second time that the Canton police officers come back to your home, who was there at that point?
I know I was there for sure. My wife, Nicole, Jen, her husband, Matt. Brian Higgins may have been there at that time. And I'm not sure about Julie. Julie at one point left the house, and I think she came back later in the morning, so I'm not sure if she was there.
And at some point when your sister-in-law, Julie, came back to your house, who, if anyone, came to your house with her?
Her husband, my brother, Chris, who's her husband.
Was this before or after the second time that the police had been in?
I believe they came back after the second time, but I'm not 100% sure. The first time that Julie came with the coffee, the police were not there.
Now, when you first sort of get up and come downstairs and the police they're basically in your doorway, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you see outside as far as what was going on outside at that time?
Not from downstairs, but I had looked out the window after Jen had come up into my room and explained what had happened, and before I went downstairs.
When you looked out your window from your bedroom, what did you see?
I could see at least one police vehicle. I could see that there was something going on out front, and that was about it, and I just went straight downstairs.
At that time that you looked out your window, did you see either an ambulance or a fire truck out there?
I don't remember if I saw an ambulance. There were emergency vehicles out there, but I can't remember exactly which types.
And at any point in time, at that time or subsequent throughout the course of the day,
he didn't mention his work vehicle, did he? I mean, they know that that question is coming. War Critic said, do you think the judge is being biased? I feel she is. She is always saying sustained to real questions. Do you think she feels she has to live with all these cops? So she is sustaining a lot of objections, okay? But she's also allowing a lot to go through when she says, when they have a question and it's like, sustained, I'll give you that. That's overruling an objection or objection. And then she asks the question to the witness. That's overruling the objection. I think from time to time, yes, she's restricted the defense a little too much. I don't think it's been overly horrible. I know a lot of people in the chat feel that way overwhelmingly. I think some of it may stem from maybe things she did in pretrial hearings that I didn't watch. But as far as, and maybe she kept out evidence that I would be like, holy cow, how did she leave that out from a pretrial hearing? But from the trial I'm watching, she is leaning prosecution, but not a ton more than a lot of judges do. Mary Claire said, I need a relationship org chart for this trial. I can't keep track of these people. I think there are people that have made this. I see some questions about the fee, the fee for this. I'll hit them at the end. Let's listen to the rest of what I want to get through with his direct, and then we'll talk fees before we leave.
Did you go out to that area of your yard where you saw the cruisers and the sort of lights?
No.
And why?
I didn't see that there was a reason to go out to that area. The police had already been in my house. They had already talked to us about what was going on. It was a snowstorm at that point. They were trying to conduct an investigation, and I didn't want to interfere with it or have anything to do with it.
Didn't go outside at all. It was important enough to call Brian Higgins to come over, but not important enough to go outside. I don't know if all the neighbors are watching, but I know if I drive down the street and there's a car accident, everybody's rubbernecking and stopping and looking. But he didn't go out to his own front yard after first responders left to see what was going on. That's interesting. I have a bunch of people saying I disagree with you. I get it. I know a lot of people disagree and think the judge is horribly biased. I think she's definitely leaning prosecution, but I wouldn't say horribly biased.
You're learning sort of when Jennifer McKay first comes sort of urging in into your bedroom at 6 to 6:30 in the morning. At any point around there, were you made aware of where John O'Keefe was at that point?
Yes.
And what were you made aware?
I was made aware that he was taken to the hospital.
So by the time that you're awoken by Mrs. McKay, John O'Keefe is, to your knowledge, not outside.
To my knowledge, I believe he was on the way to the hospital.
Now, later on in the course of that day, at some point, did you have occasion to speak with some troopers from the state police?
Yes.
And if you recall, who was it that you spoke with?
So I spoke with Trooper, last name Proctor, and then another trooper, and I don't know the last name, first name, Yuri.
Would it be Sergeant Buchanan?
It could be.
And had you met either of those troopers prior to that day?
I had never met Trooper Proctor. I had met Trooper, I forget what is the last name.
You met Trooper
Yuri. I had met him once or twice before.
Was that in a professional capacity?
Yes.
And where did you speak with him on?
Seems like this guy knows everybody, right? In a professional capacity, but I definitely think the defense is going to dig into that, and we're going to hear some bias and connections there. And then he also confirms that the sale of his house had nothing to do with what happened to John O'Keefe. All right. And that's basically the end of direct. We are going to get cross bright and early Monday morning. I can't wait to watch it myself. Chad said, took my last law school final today, graduate Sunday. Your content truly helped me procrastinate these last few years. In all seriousness, you rock. Chad, congratulations. It's one of the best days ever. I got to be honest. The worst is coming right now as you study for the bar. That was worse than law school to me. And I loved graduating, but I was much, much more relieved and happy when I found out I passed the bar. So good luck to you. Godspeed. And thank you for watching the channel, hanging out. And I hope you'll continue to hang, even though now you're a real lawyer. Gary said, are you sure you're a lawyer? You're too honest. It's so sad what's happened to lawyering, right? It's supposed to be a profession of ethics. Okay, I got to go. So let me hit these last couple questions. This cost $500K. She emailed it. Okay. EDB thought the defense team was around $200K. Peter says more than $500K. How would she pay for this? Justice Facebook page has raised $300K for Karen Reed's defense fund. So I have no idea, right? I'm not basing my thought on any data that's coming from her or anything like that. I'm basing it on we practice criminal defense. My dad does a ton of criminal defense. Our firm does it. We quote fees. I know how much stuff like this usually costs, especially they're big city lawyers, right? Boston and LA. I would be shocked if this cost less than $500,000. I would think this would cost closer to $1 million than $500,000. I don't know if they gave a discount because they really believe in something, or they wanted the publicity or whatever it may be. I'm not saying they did that. I just would be shocked if this case cost less than $500,000. It's expensive, man. It's really expensive. And it's hard because, I mean, it's 6, 7, 8 weeks that all you're doing is this trial. So you got to put a lot of other stuff and other cases on hold. You got to reject other cases if you're going to take this case. Azam, you started early, Peter. I saw YouTube started at 5, set my alarm 4:55, woke up. You were already about 20 minutes in. Why, Peter? Why? I'm sorry. I didn't know what time it was going to end. It's Friday. I've got a million plans. I have to leave in 2 minutes for dinner. So I had so many plans. So I decided to start early because all of these videos have gone over an hour, which I hate to do. For any of you that have been following me for very long, I like to keep it to an hour. I like to be prompt. Welcome to Joanna and all the new members. Thank you for being able to make it, Azam, and everybody else. Hit that like button before you leave. Make sure you subscribe and tell your friends if they're watching the case to come hang out with us here. Ask questions, give their comments, tell me how they're thinking and feeling about the case. But that's all I've got. Until next time, I am out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.